Hi, I'm Mark Stovall with Finished First Restoration, and what we want to do today is go into a little bit more depth on the 4-piece system. And what we did is we took this old 1967 Mustang, and we're going to show you all the steps on this car as we go through this process. Now, this part of the car, we left the old paint. It's got chips, it's got scratches. I mean, if you look at this thing at different angles, it's really dull. If you tried to paint over it, you would get something like this, so that's not going to work. You pretty much have to do a clean slate, strip all this off, and one way to do that takes us right over to our prep stage, which you have to strip this old paint all the way down to the bare metal and start from scratch. So a couple different ways you can do it. You can use our paint strippers, you can use 80 grit sandpaper on a disc. If you use a paint stripper, those are pretty aggressive, so even the 80 grit, what happens is as you're starting to sand this stuff down, you need to move around, because if you don't, what happens is if you stay in one area, it heats up and it's going to warp this metal, and you might end up with a worse situation than you had before. So something to keep in mind. Now this part we use the paint and rust stripper. This part we used 80 grit sandpaper. Now, if you've got some hard to reach areas and small areas that you need to get to, our conditioning disc work great, like on this panel right here. So once you strip it all down, you're going to have to try to fix all the dents and all the imperfections in the body. Now, if you have a late model car and you just have to fix a dent, then you wouldn't have to go through this whole stage of stripping it down. You may just have to fix a dent. So this area is showing there was a dent here. We sanded it down. We filled it with body filler. Then we went over and block sanded this with 80 grit. Now 80 grit is a pretty aggressive grit, and what that's going to let you do is knock down that body filler and start getting those contours back of the body. And we had another dent that was up here at top. And what we did is we used the same process. We sanded it down. We used 80 grit to start to get the profile of the body back. Then we used 180 grit, okay? Now I'm feeling this, and this is very, you can feel the scratches. You can actually see the scratches. And up here, it's a lot smoother. It's harder to see the scratches. So it's important to realize the difference in these grits, because when we get up to the paint part of it, and you're into 1500, 2000, 2500 grit, if you're not sanding all those scratches out, it's going to come through the paint job, and then you're going to have to redo it because you're going to see these scratches in the paint. So pretty important to go through your grit range. Now we had another spot here where we had some rust, and we used our cutting wheel to cut this off, cut it right out of the body. We took a new piece of metal, welded it in, and then took where there was the weld marks, as we ground those down with the Finished First grinding disc. And after we do that, we're going to go back over this, use body filler, go through the 80 grit, 180, sand this down. Now, it's very important to go through the prep stage and do a very good job, because if this stage isn't done properly, none of the rest of them are going to turn out. Now, once you get everything prepped and ready for prime, that takes you to the next step, obviously, which is the prime step. So now that we got all the prep work done, we took a lot of extra time. Like I said, if you don't have the prep work done, the rest of the steps aren't going to work out for you. So we got everything smoothed out. We're into the prime stage. So what we did with this door, if you look, we primered the entire door, okay? And after we primered the door, if you look, you'll see that there's this black, maybe overspray look. It's what they call a guide coat, and that's going to help guide you through this process. And what I mean by that, there's two different ways you can get a guide coat. You can get like a spray that's available and just spray it right over the primer, or you can get a powder form and you kind of dust it on, okay? And once you put that on, we did this whole door with that black, but we started sanding all this down. We wet sanded it with 400, and as you wet sand with the block sander, you wet sand all this down, and if you have any low areas, then it's going to show exactly where that low area is. Now, I have a low area right here, So what that tells me, if I paint it, you're going to see that big dip in the body. So we need to go back to our prep stage, fill this with body filler, sand it back down, primer it, and then use the guide coat again. Once all the black's gone, once this entire door has no black low spots, then we know it's ready to paint. That's our next step. So the body was real smooth, everything was sanded down to 400. Now, if you have flat colors like black, white, things like that, red, you can go to 400 on your prime stage, but if you're using metallic paints, then you need to go all the way up to a 600, because what happens is the metallics, they flip-flop in those little scratches, the real fine scratches, and it kind of makes shadows and goes in and out. So if you wanted to use metallics, you got to go to 600 so that lays out nice and flat, so those metallics all are laying the same way in those scratches. Now what we did is we went to 400 on this because it's a black paint. Now we painted this car, this fender right here, and what happened was, this is shiny, it's black, but if you get real close, you'll notice that there's little nibs in the paint, there's stuff in the clear. It looks good from far away, but when you get up close, it doesn't look good at all. So we have to do something with this paint. This has been unsanded. So you actually, once it's painted, you got to get rid of all this dirt and debris, and the way you do that is you're still in our paint stage, and you actually, if you were to take 1500 grit sandpaper and start sanding on this, this is what scares people, because as soon as they do, it really starts dulling this paint down. And it's supposed to, because you have to get rid of all of these nibs. And once you do that, it's going to look like this half of the hood. It's going to be dull. It's going to be just as smooth and slick as ever, but it doesn't look good because it's still dull. So what you do in that situation, you go through the grit ranges, your 1500, your 2000, and 2500, which brings you up to the polish stage. Now we're at the last stage of the 4P process, which is the polish stage, because we have to bring that dull paint back up to a shine. And we started out using a 3000 grit sandpaper on a DA. We went over the entire hood, entire side of this, then used a compound, and then used a polish, and then buffed this thing up to a shine. And these are the results you can expect by using the Finish First 4P system.